I will introduce Shawn Behling, our speaker tonight, a wetland wildlife species specialist for Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. Her work focuses on beavers, but includes waterfowl and wetlands across the state. Right, slides are jumping. As well, she holds degrees in plant ecophysiology from Seattle University, University of Maryland, and University of Washington. And while in her PhD program, she began working with beavers through Beavers Northwest. Some of you may have heard of that, and maybe she'll tell us more about that tonight a little here and there. I know you're now in your role as a WDFW staff, but I'm sure a lot of people are interested in Beavers Northwest as well. So without further ado, I will turn the mic over to you, Shawn.
Thanks so much. I am so excited by all of the folks up there in the Skagit that are ready to hear about beavers. Skagit is near and dear to my heart. I lived on Padilla Bay for a number of years, and I get to go to the Skagit pretty often to be able to do some of my field work. So I'm very excited to be able to speak to folks that share those same values and enjoy that beautiful landscape. So, today we're going to be talking about beavers. We're going to be talking about their incredible morphology, their adaptations for the work that they do. We're going to talk a little bit about what you can do when beavers do the work that they do in places where you wish they weren't, and what sort of other options you might have for coexistence in case beavers are on your landscape. We'll talk about some of the research that WDFW is participating in, and I'll make sure that there's plenty of time left over for questions. So let's get started. First, let's make sure that we are all talking about the same animal because beavers may look like a lot of other organisms that you may see in similar habitats. So when we're talking about beavers, we have a lot of similar looking critters here in Western Washington. And none of these organisms that you see here are obviously beavers, but they have very similar characteristics. And I get a lot of calls and a lot of questions about animals that people think are beavers, but are actually not. So you folks are probably already well versed in the species you see here, but let's go through it just for the fun of it. In that upper left-hand corner, we have a river otter. River otters are the only species of otter that you'll see in the Puget Sound area, but they are not picky. They will hang out in freshwater, brackish water, or salt water. This critter in the middle top is also called a beaver, but this is called a mountain beaver. Not related in any way to beaver and does not do any of the same behaviors. We know very little about this organism, but it is a very curious animal that I get a lot of folks asking for help with, but totally different from the beavers we'll be talking about today. The critter on the right upper corner is a pika. Folks might recognize this animal if you go through hikes in higher elevation areas. The animal in the lower left is a muskrat. Muskrat look very similar to beavers, especially when they're swimming, but you'll be able to identify that you're looking at a muskrat and not a beaver when they're swimming because of the rat-like tail instead of the big flat tail you'll associate with beavers. Muskrats are also much smaller. They usually top out at about 12 pounds, but beavers can be much, much bigger. And then if anybody in the audience knows what this critter is in the lower right, this is an invasive species that we have in Western Washington and actually in Eastern Washington too. This is a nutria, and nutria are not native to the United States. Instead, they are a rodent of similar size to beavers that like exactly the same habitat from South America. We actually swapped invasive species. North America got nutria, and South America got American beavers. So we are experiencing each other's experience with wetland mammals. So instead, this is the critter we're going to be talking about today. And oh, sorry, my picture is a little blurry. This was taken from one of the videos that I just shot last week. And this is a beaver, and you can tell because you have a long, flat body, this long, flat tail, and you have a head that is barely showing above the water surface. You have tiny little ears tiny little eyes and a big nose to be able to be exposed at the above the water's surface, even when they are swimming. And they can swim pretty fast, so you've got to catch them quick. Now, beavers have an incredible pelt. There is a waterproof coating on this pelt to allow them to be able to be extra fast and allow them to keep their warmth even when they are in very cold water. And it is that incredible pelt that has made them have a bit of a rough history. Here in the North America, the beaver has been prized for that fur and was trapped almost to extinction here in North America. We use their fur to be able to make hats along with a lot of other goods. And beavers were almost extirpated from most of North America, but most especially Washington State. We don't really know the numbers for most of the beaver population in the lower 48 states, but we know that those numbers were very, very low at the end of the beaver hat craze. So, everything that we know about wetlands is completely turned on its head because one of the major components of those wetlands in Washington state and beyond was beaver activity. And once beavers were extirpated, then a lot of those wetland areas either dried up or changed their morphology in ways that were unrecognizable. So when we think about landscapes that are holding water, especially those freshwater landscapes, we need to think about how this has changed since beavers were present 200 years ago, since beavers were extirpated, and since beavers have been recolonizing Washington state more recently. So let's talk a little bit about some of the incredible adaptations that beavers have. Now, we were just talking about beaver fur being so prized for making hats, but beaver fur is not always waterproof. This is a beaver kit. A kit is a baby beaver, and these baby beavers have fur that is not yet waterproof. In fact, they are so fluffy that they are buoyant and they aren't able to escape their dens. One of the reasons for that is that dens and lodges have underwater entries. And if you are full of fluff and you're not able to go underwater, then you are going to be trapped inside of your home, which keeps them safe until they're a little bit bigger and able to go out of the den and forage on their own with their other family members. Now, we were talking earlier about how those sensory organs are located at the top of the head. So the nose is really close at the top of the head, the ears, and the eyes, so that this beaver can be almost completely submerged once it gets a little bit older and still be able to sense its environment for predators or even other beavers. Beavers are highly territorial and they don't appreciate when other beavers that are not related to them might come into their territory. So they need to be able to sense the presence of others, which might take place through hearing a slap of a tail, might just be through sight, or more likely through scent. Beavers have an incredible sense of smell. And when you look at this beaver skull, this skull is telling you all of those clues. Skull morphology is one of my favorite things. And one of the great things about looking at skulls and skeletons of animals is that it's telling you the history and the behavior of that animal all at once. So when you're looking at any skull, the most space in the skull devoted to a particular sensory organ is going to be that sense that is the most dominant for that animal. And while it's a little tough to see because you don't have an actual skull in front of you, the amount of space that's devoted to the sense of smell here in the rostrum at the top and the nose area here is telling you that this animal is taking in a lot of scents in its environment. We also see that it has a relatively small eye and it really doesn't have a very large ear, so it's still able to use those senses, but it's not nearly as powerful as its sense of smell. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the dentition. So the teeth that you're seeing here are the incisors, and they're exactly the same as the incisors that you have in your jaw, except not nearly as cool. So these incisors are constantly growing. The only thing that keeps them short enough to be able to be functional is those two teeth are shearing past each other with every bite, making sure that the edges are kept chisel sharp and able to chew down any of the vegetation that it might need for eating or for building the structures that they like to build. The front of those teeth are orange in color, but the back is not. And that's because the front is enamel embedded with iron. That iron is giving it that orangish color, and it allows for the front of the tooth to be extremely strong. That way, whenever the teeth are shearing past each other with each close of the mandibles, then it is allowing for the softer enamel behind to be slowly shaved away so that the teeth remain as incredibly sharp as they can be. The rest of the dentition is telling you that this is an herbivore. A lot of us are tend to think that beavers have a some interesting relationships with fish. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But dentition is always the best way to be able to think about what an animal is eating, and these are a really big clue to that. So we'll get back to that in a little bit. Another thing I'd like to bring up is the amount of space that's here in the lower jaw or mandible. This is telling you that there is a lot of space for there to be muscle attachment. And this muscle that's down here in the mandible is going to be attaching either to the bottom part of the eye socket or to the top of the skull. And the more space you see, the bigger that muscle will be. There's actually two muscles that are attaching at slightly different parts of this part of the mandible. And both of those muscles are extremely gigantic. And that's because this animal needs a lot of power to be able to put all of that pressure on the incisors every time it's chewing down a tree or trying to get some nutrition out of whatever woody material it happens across. It also has some very interesting feet. The front and the rear feet are completely different. The front feet look very much like tiny human hands, and they can work like tiny human hands as well. They're able to carry rocks and other materials for building and can stand up on their hind legs and walk around like tiny humans holding whatever it is that they would like to transport right in front of their chests. Their hind legs, though, are massive, and they have webbing that allows for this animal to be incredibly fast with swimming. It's a little difficult for you to tell, but there's a second claw on this part, on this toe of its rear foot. And that second claw right next to it allows for the animal to be able to groom its fur. It is so important for that fur to maintain its waterproofness and make sure that it is kept as clean as possible. So there's a lot of social grooming that happens with beavers to be able to make sure that their fur is kept in tip-top shape. There's also a tiny little flap of the skin underneath those two claws. And while I'm not entirely sure about this, I suspect that this might be a great place for castor to be deposited. Castor is a product that the beaver produces from the cloaca near the rear of the animal to be able to produce scent. And so using that oily gland to create this scent and brushing it through the fur, make sure that you're able to spread the message about this being your territory wherever you happen to go. Okay, so now that we have talked a little bit about all of these incredible adaptations of this animal, let's discuss about some of the behavior of this animal. So we know that beavers build a couple of different structures. Dams are one of the most important of all of those structures. So I'm going to give you a second to be able to decide why beavers build dams. And I'm going to hope that you guessed that beavers build dams to make ponds, to escape predators, and to essentially farm food. Let's talk about those other options real quick. First, dams are not hollow structures. There's no space inside of them to be able to live. Any of the structures that are hollow that they build are lodges, and they don't hold back water the same way that dams do. Beavers do not like to be on land, and so making bridges from one side of a stream to another is not something that they're really interested in, given how easy it would be for them to be predated upon. Beavers are vegetarian, so they have no interest in catching fish. That's why those really flat molars at the back of the jaw in the skull are flat like the way they are. If beavers were chasing down fish and eating them, you'd see very different dentition. Beavers are entirely vegetarian. So instead, beavers are building dams to be able to expand the area where they feel safest. And they do that by making not only a larger pond, but allowing for water to infiltrate into the soil around the pond so that they can build little channels through all of that space and get to all the forage material or vegetation for eating or building that they might need. So let's talk a bit about some of those structures. This might be a structure that you are familiar with seeing, and this is an example of a lodge. Lodges are hollow structures, and they typically have two different floors inside of them. These lodges don't always have exactly the same format, but the most common format is a big flat area that serves as a bedroom and also as a pantry in the winter for any vegetation that they'd like to store. And then there's a lower space that is acting like a mudroom. Sometimes this area is submerged, sometimes it isn't, and it's a bit like a landing area before beavers get into this drier space higher. It's a little tough to see from this illustration, but these entryways are underwater, and that makes sure that beavers are a little safer from any of the predators that may not be as good of swimmers as they are. Typically, beaver lodges have two different entrances, but not always. It makes sure that if there's any trouble at one entrance, then they can always escape through the back door. So that other structure we were talking about, dams, may look in this most majestic picture a little bit like this. Dams are typically built out of rock, mud, whatever sediment might be there, and sticks. But it doesn't just end with that. I've seen dams that have been built with fence posts. I've seen the usage of burlap sacks and plastic bags. I've also seen beavers use all kinds of material that you wouldn't expect, but might be laying around in a barnyard. The one of my favorite stories is that another person that I work with in the beaver world has seen a prosthetic limb used in one of these beaver dams. So they are very creative in the materials that they can use. So these beaver dams are dense. There is no hollow space inside of here, but they do allow water to pass through. And that water might not just be water alone. It could be fish, it could be amphibians, it could be all kinds of critters that are living in these spaces. So this is a porous structure, and it is allowing water to flow through and around. When you look at a beaver structure, you'll typically only see the logs that are on top, but at the base, there is mud that's been packed down and rocks that have been placed in very precise ways to be able to make this an even more resilient structure. One of the things that is most mysterious about beavers is that a lot of times folks don't realize that beavers are constantly repairing and improving the structures that they create. And one of the reasons that you may not know that is because beavers are entirely nocturnal most of the time. Beavers like to do most of their work at night and like to be out of their lodges or dens at night because they are so easy to predate. They're very slow on land. They are usually not very great at sensing danger when they're on land. And for that reason, they try to spend as little time in the daylight where they could be easily spotted. But sometimes beavers may occupy areas where they feel extremely safe. And in those cases, beavers may hang out in the middle of the day if they know that predators are not going to be predating them. One of the examples is Meadowbrook Pond in Shoreline, where beavers might hang out with their kits all day, every day, and be perfectly happy with hanging out no matter what the no matter what the weather or what the time might be. So there are some anomalies out there. So beavers are making these beautiful wetland structures, although it can be a little bit difficult to make sure that everyone shares the same vision that you and I might have. These wetland structures are very important to making sure that our landscapes are resilient, especially to fire, but also just for enhancing the species diversity and abundance on so many different levels. We see that beaver presence is positively associated with diversity and abundance numbers for birds, mammals, vegetation, arthropods, all kinds of critters that are sharing these habitats benefit from beaver presence. One of the reasons, though, that beavers have been getting a lot of attention lately in the West is because of a lot of great work that's been done by a researcher at the University of Minnesota. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Emily Fairfax's work. She's a professor in the University of Minnesota, and I am going to share into the chat. Oh, I forgot that I'm not able to share links because, oh wait, let's give this a try. Hold on just a second. It'll be worth it. Let's see. Oh, amazing. So I've just popped into the chat a link for you to view later of a YouTube video that was made by Emily Fairfax, who does not only a fantastic job of investigating beaver and fire relationships, but also of just spreading the information about how beaver interact with the landscape in general. She does a lot of beautiful animation and visualizations that I think need to be seen by more people. So I'm glad you will be seeing it soon. So let's talk a little bit more about Emily Fairfax's work and what she's discovered. So in general, when we see a stream that does not have beavers present, then you'll see water at the surface in the stream channel. And underneath that stream channel, that stream water as part of the groundwater is going to occupy a relatively small space. Water is also going to be filtering into the soil column wherever there's vegetation, and there's been some rain recently. But typically, that water will stay within the first couple of inches, depending on what soil type we're talking about, and pretty much stay there to be able to allow that vegetation to thrive. If we're talking about an environment that beavers have colonized, though, then not only does that stream channel usually widen and become less incised, but we also see that there is more groundwater in general. It's basically flooded. And we see that the entire soil column has been saturated with water. Now, when we see drought conditions like we do even here in Western Washington, then we'll see that that groundwater has changed its location and that we see less water on the surface. For the vegetation in the riparian zone that does not see beavers, then you'll see that there's drier vegetation in the riparian zone, but vegetation closer to that stream channel will stay green and continue to grow. In areas where beavers are present, then that water, the permeation of the groundwater further away from the stream channel is going to allow for a wider riparian zone to continue to survive. And if we go even further and we have fire conditions, then we'll see that areas without beavers will burn right up to the edge of that stream channel. But areas where beavers are present, we'll see a much bigger resilience for all of the vegetation that are not just right next to the channel, but even much, much further out. And we see this in a lot of the research. Oh, I'm going to skip that really quick. A lot of the research that Emily Fairfax has done. So here's an example of an area that has been hit by wildfire, and you see that all of these hillsides are completely covered in charred conifers, but you have this oasis of green through the pond and the channels that the beavers have built on this landscape. So through the work of beavers, vegetation is able to persist even in areas where there's extreme wildfires. Those megafires are one of the biggest concerns that we have in Western Washington, or in the West in general, when fires hit. And so having these oases to be able to block fire in some cases, or at least lessen the damage, is an incredible benefit. Here's another example of some of Emily Fairfax's data that she's been collecting. So you can see that these are all conifers on the edge that have been burned to a crisp, but you have this beautiful green oasis that beavers have built that survived this fire. So we were talking about how beavers build these big ponds to be able to allow for them to have deeper water to escape predators. It also allows for the species that they prefer to thrive in a larger space. But beavers also build these channels that permeate into the soil and the vegetation on the sides of those stream channels, allowing them to get further into areas where they previously would have had to walk on land. Beavers are trying to avoid walking on land so they don't get eaten. So these channels can be very beneficial to help them stay alive. But it can also be very beneficial to help make sure that water penetrates further into that vegetative buffer on each side of the rivers or streams that beavers are occupying, so that we see that water is keeping a larger vegetative zone around that stream or pond than it would without the presence of beavers. One of the amazing things that we've learned in the past couple of decades is that beavers are not the only ones that can build these dams. So we can use what's called a beaver dam analog, or BDA, to be able to essentially make structures that look like beaver dams. And in some cases, when we really work hard at it, sometimes beavers will colonize those BDAs and eventually make them their own and make them better. So BDAs are essentially human-made beaver dams, and they can be placed in areas where they're doing exactly the same thing, but not as good as beavers could do. And beavers move in, and then you eventually have that beautiful complex wetlands that you hope for. So I'm just going to touch really quickly on some of the research that we're doing here in WDFW and some of the partners that we have. We are working closely with Washington State University in the Peoria Scott Lab to be able to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to be able to learn about the landscapes where beavers are being introduced to using eDNA. eDNA is a way for us to be able to use basically a fancy pump and bring that water through a filter and then send that filter off to look at every little bit of DNA that might have been in that water sample. Using eDNA, we can learn if there's been a beaver or 20 beavers in that space, as well as all of the vegetation, other animals, other humans that might be in that space as well. We're also working with Google's Eager project, which is using satellite products to help identify where beavers might be on the landscape. So we're very proud of these partnerships. They are ongoing, and we will be sharing this publicly whenever our results for either of these projects come up. So let's talk a little bit about what to do when beavers might occupy a space that you wish that they weren't. We have a lot of instances where beavers choose to occupy spaces that are maybe not ideal, but you can do a lot to help make sure that beavers can stay in the landscape and you don't see those ill effects. So one of the easiest ways to help make sure that you can coexist with beavers is through tree wrapping. And tree wrapping might seem like a very simple idea, but there are some very precise details that you should keep in mind when wrapping trees. First, you'll need to make sure that you're using wire fencing that's been welded instead of chicken wire, and those beavers can chew right through that. You also need to make sure that those fences are held down to the ground because beavers can pick those right up or can climb right over it. You need to make sure that there's enough space for the tree to grow. So space that fence a little bit away from the trunk, depending on what species it might be. And you'll also need to make sure that that fence is at least 3 feet tall. Beavers can be very long, and so making sure that they can't reach to the above that fence can really be helpful. Tree wrapping is something that you can do on an individual tree basis, or you can fence off an entire area. It is a little bit more difficult when we're talking about the scale of orchards, but it still can be accomplished, and it can do a lot of good. Another important detail is that when you are wrapping trees, make sure that you are wrapping them at the right time. because it was definitely too late for this tree wrapping operation. So make sure that you're doing things proactively to help make sure that you are getting the results you're looking for. So tree wrapping is something that you can do on your own. There are lots of guides online. I know that the Methow Okanagan Beaver Project has some guides and videos online to help you do this right. But there are also people to help you do tree wrapping and other coexistence practices if you would like that assistance. So the Washington Beaver Management Practitioners Map is a map that's been created by the Methow Okanagan Beaver Project, and they've done a beautiful job of helping to make sure that people can have an access to different resources so that they can have help doing whatever they need to do to make sure that beavers stay in place. So give me just a second, and I am going to place that into the chat. Oh, there we go. Just kidding. Oh, nope, Zoom won't let me, but don't you worry. I'm gonna make sure that you all have access to these links at the end of the end of my talk. How funny that it won't let me paste that in. Ah, so frustrating. Anyway, you can use this QR code if you would like to view this right away, or just wait until the end of my chat and I'll be sure to put that in. As a little sneak peek, this story map will help you. Oh, there we go. Will help you find whatever sort of practitioner you're looking for across the state. We do not have practitioners everywhere in Washington state, as much as I wish we did, but these are folks that we know are well trained and well versed in all of the different ways of making sure that beavers can stay on the landscape, and in some cases can be relocated if you need them to. All right, so let's go on and talk about a next level of coexistence, and those are in-stream devices. Now, these are structures that I would not recommend you trying on your own, even though they may look very simple. There is an art to installing and creating each one of these. So the first one I'm going to describe to you is a pond leveler. A pond leveler is basically a pipe that works like a drain, and this pipe is placed through a dam, and it allows for water to be held at whatever level the landowner wishes it was. This cage here is helping to make sure that the intake is placed at the level that the landowner would like the water to stay at. And this pipe is placed inside of the dam, and the dam we replace all of the woody material on top of it. And in most cases, beavers will just keep on building and not even realize that the water is being drained away slowly, and that everybody gets to stay in the places that they've chosen. So it works very well for both beavers and landowners to be able to make sure that ponds do not expand beyond a desired diameter. Other in-stream devices are things called notch exclusion devices. Notch exclusion devices is a technique that Beavers Northwest has really done an incredible amount of work and tried to perfect. One of the things that I am really excited about is how they're working to make sure that these in-stream devices allow for even more salmon passage than they would before. So these in-stream devices basically work to make sure that beavers do not build over a notch that's been cut into that dam, and just allows that water to stay at a given level. There are other designs that Beavers Northwest has developed since these images that create little channels with this wire fencing that allow for salmon to be able to pass through without needing to go through the spaces in this cattle panel. Although the spaces in these cattle panel we've seen in underwater cameras work just fine in allowing fish to be able to pass. Another common in-stream device is a culvert protector or beaver deceiver. These culvert protectors allow for beavers to stay in that space that they have chosen, but prevent them from building around that culvert. Culverts are perfect places for beavers because it already restricts flow. It's basically already a dam that just needs a little help. So by creating this big fence around that culvert, it creates so much space, that surface area that needs to be covered with woody material, that beavers basically give up. So it can be really helpful, especially if you have a culvert or some sort of small pipe that you need to protect. So in some cases, these devices just don't fit the bill. In some cases, especially with man-made water structures, agricultural ditches, sometimes tide gates, we may try all of these coexistence options, and it just doesn't do the trick. If that's the case, lethal trapping is legal here in Washington state, and landowners can legally trap beavers on their land year round without a permit. You can also hire someone to do the trapping for you. A wildlife control operator can be found through a Fish and Wildlife website. But we also have this option. Oh, that's so funny. We also have this option of relocation. Washington state is the only state in the United States that allows for beavers to be relocated and moved by citizens. In general, we don't really think that it's a good idea for citizens to interact with wildlife this closely. But in this case, we have a program that allows folks to come to our training, do our online training, and receive a free permit to be able to move beavers on the landscape. You would need to complete both that in-person and online training. You'd need to be able to pass a background check. You need to turn in some paperwork to let us know where beavers are coming from and where they're going to. But it has been an incredibly successful project, and so far we've moved about 150 beavers since its inception in 2019. This was at one point a pilot program while we evaluated it and fine-tuned the program, but it has newly become a permanent program through the WAC 220 450 230 last December, and now this program is permanent. So, one thing that makes it difficult for a lot of folks to join that program, unfortunately, is that we require that all of our beaver relocators have a beaver holding facility. A beaver holding facility can take a lot of different forms, but this is our gold standard here on the left. This is the Methow Okanagan Beaver Project's beaver holding facility over in Winthrop. It is using an old salmon run in one of the federal hatcheries, but we have participants in the program that use backyard structures. We have dog kennels with and dog runs that have stock tanks. We have a lot of variability on what we allow within the program, as long as it meets our criteria. And these holding facilities are inspected every year to make sure that they meet those criteria. This image on the right is maybe some of you will recognize Molly Alves from the Tulalip Beaver Project. And this is one of our trainings that is helping new relocators, or really anybody that's interested, understand how to best reduce stress when relocating beavers. And in this case, we're taking a beaver out of a suitcase trap and into a cone to be able to determine the sex of that beaver. So, one other tool that we have to help make this program successful is that we want to make sure that that beavers are set up for success. So we have some GIS tools to help make sure that our relocators are selecting stream reaches that are going to have optimal hydrology conditions for beavers, and that we require that every one of these relocation sites is inspected using a rubric that we train people on how to use within the program. We unfortunately do not have relocators permitted everywhere. These are the folks that are permitted right now, though. So if you live in one of these counties, you are lucky. But you'll notice that up here in Skagit and Whatcom, we are relocator-less. So if you happen to be one of those folks that is interested in coming to our next training is going to be in Winthrop on May 19th, and we'll have another one that will be in Tulalip with the Tulalip Beaver Project, June 25th. Everyone is welcome. It's free and it's very fun. So please let me know if you would like to join. All right. Well, with that, folks, I'm very excited to take any questions that you might have. One thing that I'd like to note before I take questions, the Beaver Relocation Program is a hugely successful project, but we do have a requirement that only beavers that have exhausted all of our coexistence options are allowed to be relocated legally. So beavers need to we beaver relocators need to consider all of those options and have relocation only as a last resort to lethal removal before beavers can be considered. All right. And with that, I'd love to take any questions that anybody might have.
So much, Sean. We are looking at the chat and I'm not seeing a lot of questions yet. I think people were pretty wrapped with your presentation, and so I'm hoping to see a few pop up. Um, in the meantime, someone commented that they really like the idea of the relocation and they would love to be part of something like that in the future. So if you could send me the information about those trainings that you mentioned, maybe I can share that with our attendees through email after the call.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I would love to do that. Oh, I just got a
okay.
question from Jacqueline. Um, Jacqueline has asked me, how do you tell the sex of a beaver? What a great question. Let's go back to this image. So this bag here is basically a canvas piping bag that has a lot of handles that have been sewn into it and some restriction straps. So the way you tell the sex of a beaver is you allow the beaver to move into this cone. Usually this is done in water so that the beaver feels supported, but held at the surface so they don't drown. And once the beaver's nose is sticking at this end of the bag, then you have the cloaca, the opening for everything on the other end that's available for you to be able to inspect. Now, beavers don't have any external parts, so you can't see any genitalia from the outside. So instead, there is that castor that we had talked about. Those castor organs secrete a material that is distinct in smell between males and females. So you basically get a little bit of that material on a piece of paper towel and you pass it around. You have people decide if it smells more like cheese or smells more like gasoline. If it smells more like cheese, you have a female. And if it smells more like gasoline, then it's probably a male. It is a lot easier when there are some teats to be able to look at, but most of the time we have to use that process instead. It's a strange one. We do not require sexing in the program, though. The Tulalip Beaver Project, as a sovereign nation, gets to choose a slightly different approaches. And so they sometimes will attempt to matchmake beavers, and they will need to sex a beaver to be able to do that successfully. Oh, great. Oh, I have another question from Susan. Susan was asking about Northwest beavers health-wise, disease issues, and genetic diversity. Yeah, great question. We are just getting started with figuring out what a baseline looks like for this population, not just in the north and the west side, but on the east side too. So we are gathering beavers to be able to perform necropsies and take tissue samples to be able to determine if we have disease prevalent, if we have carriers, or if our beavers are disease free. So that's really not something that we know yet, but we are learning right now. We are also a little bit worried about a fungus called chytrid, which can affect amphibians. So right now, the relocation program has some restrictions on where beavers can go based on where they have come from, in the hopes that we are not moving this fungus chytrid around with the beaver. We have some precautions in place that everybody needs to abide by to help make sure that that's not happening. But we also are doing research on where this already is to hopefully make it a little bit easier for people to move beavers and to also understand where chytrid can be. Our funding for that is a little limited right now, but we're working on grants and hopefully we'll be able to find some more dollars to make that work. So hopefully we'll know more soon. Oh yeah, and Jacqueline is asking how many beavers typically live in a den? What a great question. Yeah, it totally depends on how good of a season it has been for a beaver pair. Beavers can have a set of kits twice or maybe even three times a year. And each one of those kits typically is about two kits, but can sometimes be up to four. Kits stay with their parents in the den until they're about 2 years old. So if you're having that many beavers every year, you can imagine it can get crowded. The most beavers that I've ever seen in a single den has been 12 beavers, but it can definitely be more in my imagination. So yeah, very interesting. Yeah, Rachel is asking what preys on beavers. Oh my God, all kinds of things. Beavers are bobcats' favorite prey. Cougars also are a big fan of beavers. Bears and coyotes can also be a big fan of beavers as well. The kits are very portable, and so a lot of ospreys and eagles can prey on kits as they're swimming about. We also see that, you might have you might have sometimes large. Oh, oh my goodness, I just lost my train of thought. I think that's all I've got. Oh, owls. That's what I was trying to say. Owls can sometimes take out small kits if they are out of the den too quickly. So beavers are basically walking chicken nuggets once they're on land. So just about anything can predate on them. All right. Um, yeah, Susan is asking if beavers help reduce invasive species. What a great question. And in some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. If we're talking about aquatic invasive species, which unfortunately Western Washington has quite a lot of, just by increasing the amount of water on the landscape can sometimes make it easier for those aquatic species to just establish more of themselves. But we are learning more about how to be able to work with beaver dam analogs to sometimes flood out those aquatic invasive species at a certain stage of their development, early after they are before they've really established themselves. You can increase the water depth, and it can, given the water turbidity, it can sometimes prevent those invasive species from taking off. If we're talking about aquatic animals, that's typically not something that we see. In fact, beavers can help with increasing habitat for a lot of our endangered species. So species like the Oregon spotted frog really benefit from beaver presence in the habitat that they create. So it can be really fantastic to see them on the landscape in areas where we know Oregon spotted frog are hanging out. All right. Oh yeah. Oh, and Jane had wondered about those beaver predators. Yeah, cougars, bobcats, family dogs sometimes. It can really be just about any carnivore out there would be pretty happy with a beaver, unfortunately. Oh yeah. And if you would like to join one of our beaver relocation trainings, I will happily send that out to be sent your way, but also I can probably give you that link right this minute in the chat because I would love to have more folks, especially from the Skagit, join us. So give me just a second. Oh, there it is. And I'm going to grab the link and copy it. And I am placing that link for our relocation training right there in the chat. So I should have created a hyperlink for it instead of just pasting that raw URL, but hopefully you can still be able to click on the forms. Just click on everything I've posted and you'll get to it eventually. All right, let's keep going with these questions. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Interesting. Somebody asked about beavers swimming in marine water, salt water. Yeah, beavers make terrible choices sometimes, often actually. And swimming in salt water means that you are gonna get saline poisoning, and relatively pretty quickly. We see that beavers that colonize estuaries and saltwater habitats typically don't live longer than 3 years. And also, like, can you imagine how frustrating it would be to build dams in a tide, knowing that there's going to be something breaking down your dam twice a day, every day? I mean, I that would pretty much drive me to insanity. So I really feel bad for the saltwater beavers. We do have a fantastic researcher in the Skagit who is an expert on saltwater beavers. We were working with him actually at there's a WDFW property that's at the mouth of the Skagit, and we are working to be able to figure out ways to increase beaver population without and also increase salmon habitat and also decrease invasive vegetation habitat all at once. So yeah, there's a lot to consider in that project, but we're trying our best. And yes, absolutely anyone can take this beaver relocation training that I've put the invitation into the chat. The best part is that if you go through the training and if you are able to have a beaver holding facility, which is really the hardest part, or you find some hatchery that's able to share space, or you have some other creative result to get a space to hold beavers very temporarily, then yes, absolutely. You can offer your services to other people in the county, and we can post your information saying that you are willing to do that, or not. You can just take the training and learn more, and that's the end of that. That's fine. The training is free for anybody that's interested. Oh, yeah. And someone asked about why beavers make their den out of wood. Yeah, and sometimes they don't. I've seen dens that are made mostly out of mud. Beavers will use grasses, not as like a main building material, but as a major component of that structure. They just have the most excellent wood chewing apparatus attached to their skulls that it just makes a lot of sense. Like wood is abundant and it likes hanging out very close to the ponds that beavers like making, so it feels like a perfect match. Oh yeah. Are there areas where invasive nutria are pushing beavers out to a significant degree? Not within Washington state that I have seen, although it can be very difficult. Nobody's really keeping track of where the nutria are, except the people who hunt nutria. So we're trying to learn more about where nutria are, but for the most part, it seems like it is not a major problem here in this state. All right. Yeah, a beaver reintroduction success. Yeah, what a fantastic idea. We have had two partnerships that are fantastic. They helped us create this program and they are continuing to support us. And that's through the Tulalip Beaver Project and the Metau Okanagan Beaver Project. Now, the Metau Okanagan Beaver Project has been relocating beavers in a very arid environment for decades. And they have examples of where you've had highly incised, channelized streams that are straight shots where you have barely any riparian vegetation and you have like no diversity at all. And beavers can create this incredibly lush wetland. I actually was out in Winthrop last weekend and we went to go visit it, and there are burn scars everywhere, but there's this beautiful, glowing, bright green space with this beautiful beaver complex in the center that was able to escape those burns. Like the big burns were 2021. I guess there were big burns pretty much every year, but the space persists and it's very, very beautiful. The Tulalip Beaver Project has also been relocating beavers for decades, and their projects are so cool. They've done some research on looking at the the amount of surface water that results from beaver presence, and they've seen the surface water amount triple within a year. So it is just a fantastic way of being able to improve habitat with this free, industrious little worker. So it works out really well. And Richard asks about current population in the state. What a great question. We don't know. We have a lot of models that tell us how many beavers could potentially be on which streams, and we can extrapolate that out to be whatever value makes sense, but we just really don't know. So we are depending on citizens and incidental sightings for now, but we hope to be able to have a more robust survey to be able to answer that question hopefully next year. In the meantime, we look at data from iNaturalist. We look at data from iBeaver, which is a beaver-specific data set that works like iNaturalist. So when you see beavers out there in the landscape, let us know through iBeaver. It will get to us eventually. And prospects for growth. Yeah. Without knowing how many there are, we really don't know how it should grow. Right now, the Habitat Program is working to create a beaver management guidelines document with an external analysis organization. And we should have actually some information from that project in the next month. It will go out to public comment, so you are welcome to comment on that document next month. I don't have a link to share with you because the report has not yet been generated, but make a Google alert for Beaver and WDFW and it will show up in your inbox eventually. And yeah, if you are interested in seeing beavers, awesome. There are lots of different ways to do that, and just about any area that has fresh water is a good place to look for it. But you need to do it at night. So that's one of the worst parts about looking for beaver is that you have to stay up late unless you go to Meadowbrook Pond. It's the only place I know of where they are not nocturnal. Meadowbrook Pond is in just a little bit north of Seattle, so it's probably a journey for most of you, but it's worth it. The kits are going to be coming out in probably the next week or two, and it's going to be amazing. But really, any place that has water is probably home to beavers. I live down in Seattle now, and we have beavers in almost every single one of our city parks. We even see them next to the ferry and some really inconvenient spots. I actually just got a call about that yesterday. So, yep, they are everywhere. Just go out at night. Wow, folks, such great questions. This has been so fantastic. I'm so glad you're so interested and excited about this amazing species. Uh, I am happy to keep chatting with you, but also maybe those questions won't come up in your brain until after you've ruminated on this a little bit. So I'm just going to pop my email into the chat just in case you might be able to just click on it right away and save it in your inbox.
I have a question here from Jess and Charlie
Oh,
that says,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, one idea or theory in restoration is to plant willows or other species very close together to provide a vegetative fence instead of a built fence to keep beavers out or deter them from accessing a different area.
Ooh.
What are your thoughts on this strategy?
Oh, I don't think that would be a good strategy. I love that idea.
Yeah,
But willows, man, willows are full of sugar. They're really delicious. They make perfect building material. They have amazing cambium, full of sugar, especially right now. They're just gonna chew those puppies up. And out there in the wild, this works out great for established willows because willows have sprout so easily. It makes a bushy structure that makes smaller stems that allows the willow to persist and get to a fruiting and flowering stage. But the beavers have also gotten what they wanted out of the willow. So that works great at that point. But when you're working on a restoration site, that does not really work. Willows are one of those magical species that you just take a stick and you stab it into the ground and then a willow takes off. Unless there's a beaver within like a mile, or they will find it. So one of the options that Matau Okanagan Beaver Project actually practices is that they will make these little bundles of willow, three willow sticks that are all stuck together, that they tie together with some sort of natural material, sisal, hemp, some sort of twine. And then they make a tiny little trench, and then they put the entire bundle horizontally into the ground. And as long as there's some sunlight reaching this bundle, then you'll have a number of different sprouts all along that entire bundle instead of just three trees from those three stems. And having all of those little sprouts is going to make much smaller diameter sprouts than beavers would be interested in. And you end up with a lot more sprouts in the end. You might also want to stake this down if you have a lot of flow or a lot of flooding events. So you just put another stick, or you can put in vegetative stakes to help make sure that it stays where you've put it, and it can be much more successful in increasing your willow population. But yeah, it's tough with beavers. and willows. It is their most favorite food.
I was wondering, what are some of the most common misconceptions that the public has about beavers,
Oh
and
yeah,
how
great
how
question.
does WDFW address those? You've touched on that somewhat, but I wondered if you had anything to add.
Yeah, yeah. We have a lot of folks that feel that beavers are negatively affecting fish populations. And from all of the research that we have at our disposal through our academic partners and through our own research, that is just not the case. It is very understandable why people might think that. You have a dam. That should be a hindrance for fish passage. But like I said, these dams are very porous. So you have fry and the smaller fish are able to flow downstream through the dam, and you have larger fish are able to spawn above the dam and around the dam to be able to get to their spawning grounds. So we really see that the benefits of beaver presence, it far outweighs the any chance that a beaver might be negatively affecting fish. Beavers can pull the water temperature for a stream down multiple degrees, which is one of the biggest problems with our salmonid habitat here in Washington State. Water is too warm for beavers to be able to, or for salmon to be able to be healthy or keep their eggs viable. So having those lower stream temperatures, those cold water refugia that beavers create, is an extraordinary benefit. So yeah, fish and beavers have coexisted for millions of years, and they're doing it now, and they're pretty happy about it too.
Thank you so much. That's a great one. That's a great misconception to correct.
Yeah.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough, but it really is incredible. And the other species that occupy beaver habitat, the diversity and abundance of invertebrates that fish, the younger salmon are feeding on is just incredible with beaver presence. I mean, we've seen the wetlands that are really well developed, or you're going to have a lot of bugs. And salmon just love that. We just don't see that same diversity without beaver presence. There's been a couple of studies that show that abundance and size of individual fish or a salmon species it increases dramatically with beaver presence. It's not a study from Washington State, but it's a study I'd really like to be able to duplicate here to be able to make that ring home for folks in this state as well.
Oh, well, folks, if you have any more questions, now's the time to put those in the chat. I have one more, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was wondering about strategies that you use to manage human beaver conflicts when there's flooding of infrastructure or farmland. And you've talked about relocation. I was wondering if there were any other non-lethal management techniques that you had tried that had been successful. One thing I've understood is that if the habitat is good enough, if you move the beaver, they tend to come back. And it
Yes.
might be different beaver, and they might be harder to manage than the previous beaver. And so there's some challenges. So I just wondered if you had any comments about like effectiveness for landowners who want to coexist with beavers.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. If you relocate a beaver, if that habitat's perfect, more beavers will show up. Same thing if you lethally remove a beaver, more beavers will come. But coexistence can help deter beaver activity for a much longer period of time. So working with specialists, especially like Beavers Northwest, which does serve Skagit County, can be a really great place to start. Tree wrapping is sometimes all you need to be able to be happy with a beaver being on your property. But if there's water accumulating in places where you wish it wasn't, then sometimes those other in-stream devices are your best bet. We are currently working with some collaborators to figure out if electric fencing is something that we could use very low to the ground, or even in some cases, floating fences in waterways to be able to deter beavers away. Agricultural ditches are one of those situations where coexistence is just really difficult to implement. And so maybe deterrence is our best bet. There's also some research going on with using sound or electricity in underwater environments to be able to deter beavers away. That's still something that's in the works. We really just don't have any results on that yet. But uh, tree wrapping and understanding that when beavers are on your landscape, that it is improving it not just for themselves, but for you as well. We tend to like a lot of control in the environments that we occupy, but the the outdoor environment that you are managing is not just for you to be able to control, but also to be a steward to as well. I'm sure that the folks in this audience know that all too well. So sometimes adjusting our expectations to what is beautiful and what is acceptable sometimes mean understanding that beaver habitat is just what you might need, even though it wasn't what you had in mind.
Thank you so much. And if there are any educational or outreach programs that can help people better understand how to coexist with beavers, we would love to have any resources you have to share with participants through email after later this week when I put together an email for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any resources because I know some of our partners are in the audience and are dealing with have public education motives as well. So
Yeah,
I don't
sure. I
know.
will I will let you know with all my resources.
Yeah, thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything before we thank Shawn? I do want to announce our next speaker series talk. So if nobody else has any questions, I will do that quickly. It doesn't look like anyone else has questions. So thank you so much, Shawn. Again, I just think beavers are such a fun topic, and you covered this so thoroughly and so engagingly. And we are super grateful that you were taking time out of your very busy schedule to do this. I know that you've been in a beaver pond a lot of this week and have kind of emerged to do this talk for us. And so, it's a big deal at this time of year to do something like this for us. And so, thank you again. This is a great another card that we received from kids that came out on our properties. I thought couldn't say it better myself. I thought that was super cute. Um, yeah, what fascinating and somewhat controversial wetland architects we have here, and I feel like I have a better understanding after this talk, and I'm sure many of the others in the audience feel that way too. Um, And yeah, thank you for everything you're doing to raise awareness about the importance of beavers to the health of local ecosystems in the Skagit and beyond. Thank you so much to our audience for listening and sending your questions. We hope to see you online on May 14th for Jack's talk, as well as maybe in person for the Camas hike on Remus Island. Thank you so much again, Shawn, and see you at the next one, everybody. Thank you.